The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an eerie glow on the empty aisles of the grocery store. I had been working late, and it was almost midnight when I decided to stop by for some groceries. The store was deserted, save for a few stock boys working the night shift. I made my way through the aisles, picking up the items on my list. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerators and the occasional rustle of plastic bags. I felt an odd sense of unease creeping up on me, but I ignored it, chalking it up to the late hour and the eerie silence of the store. As I was about to check out, I noticed a strange figure standing in the shadows by the back exit. It was tall and slender, with long, bony fingers that twitched and fidgeted nervously. Its face was obscured by the shadows, but I could make out two large, glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure didn't move, but its eyes remained fixed on me, sending shivers down my spine. I tried to break the silence, to say something, but no words would come out. Suddenly, the figure stepped forward, its movement slow and deliberate. It moved closer and closer, its eyes never leaving mine. I could feel its presence, a cold, oppressive force that seemed to suck the air out of the room. I turned to run, but my legs felt like lead. I stumbled and fell, the grocery bags spilling out around me. The figure reached out, its long, bony fingers brushing against my skin. I screamed, a terrified cry that echoed through the empty store. The figure recoiled as if startled, its eyes widening in surprise. Then, without a word, it turned and disappeared into the shadows. I lay there on the floor, trembling and gasping for breath. The stock boys came running, their faces pale with fear. I told them what I had seen, but they didn't believe me. They thought I was just imagining things, that the long hours at work had gotten to me. I tried to convince them, but they just shook their heads and told me to go home. I left the store that night feeling shaken and unsettled. I couldn't get the image of the figure out of my head, its glowing eyes and bony fingers still haunting my thoughts. I never saw the figure again, but the memory of that night has stayed with me ever since. I still don't know what it was, or why it was in the grocery store that night. But I know one thing, it was real, and it was terrifying. The chill of the early morning air bit at my skin as I entered the dimly lit grocery store. The usual hustle and bustle of the day were yet to begin, leaving an eerie silence that hung heavy in the air. I grabbed a shopping cart and began making my way down the aisles, the fluorescent lights casting long shadows that danced and flickered across the empty shelves. As I browsed the produce section, a strange sensation crept over me, an unsettling feeling of being watched. I glanced around, but there was no one else in sight. I shook off the feeling and continued my shopping, but the unease lingered. As I turned down the next aisle, a sudden gust of wind swept through the store, sending a shiver down my spine. The lights flickered and dimmed, and for a moment, I was plunged into darkness. When the lights came back on, I saw a shadowy figure standing at the end of the aisle. Its form was indistinct, obscured by the shadows, but I could make out the outline of a tall, slender figure. Its eyes glowed with an eerie luminescence, piercing the darkness like twin beacons. Frozen in fear, I watched as the figure glided towards me, its movement smooth and fluid. The air grew colder, and a sense of dread washed over me. I tried to turn and run, but my legs felt like lead, refusing to obey. The figure stopped a few feet away from me, its glowing eyes fixed upon me. I could sense its presence, a malevolent force that seemed to drain the life from the room. "Don't be afraid," a voice whispered in my ear, a voice that sent chills down my spine. It was deep and raspy, like the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. I tried to speak, but no words would come out. I could only stare at the figure, my heart pounding in my chest. "You are not alone," the voice continued. "I am here to watch over you." Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished into thin air. The lights flickered back to their normal brightness, and the cold air began to dissipate. I stood there for a moment, trembling and confused. Was it just a hallucination, a product of my overactive imagination? Or had I truly encountered something supernatural? I never found the answer to that question. But from that day on, I never felt alone in the grocery store. I could always sense the presence of the figure, watching over me from the shadows. And I never felt afraid again. It was a quiet night at the grocery store. As the lone stock boy working the graveyard shift, It was my job to restock shelves and prepare inventory for the next day. I was in the back room organizing a cart of cans when I heard a shout from the front of the store. Dropping what I was doing, I ran out to see what was happening. That's when I saw him, a disheveled man dragging a struggling customer towards the employee area. "Help!" the customer screamed, fighting against the man's iron grip. Thinking fast, I lunged at the attacker, grabbing him by the shoulders and trying to wrestle him away. But he was incredibly strong. We struggled, exchanging blows as the customer crawled away in terror. I managed to land a hard punch to the man's jaw, dazing him long enough for me to pin him against the wall. "What do you want from her?" I demanded. But when he turned to face me, his eyes were devoid of humanity. A guttural growl escaped his lips as he threw me off with shocking force. I hit the ground hard, momentarily stunned. By the time I regained my senses, the man had vanished back into the darkened store. Helping the shaken customer to her feet, I radioed for the manager and the police. As we waited for help to arrive, the customer recounted how the man had appeared from the shadows and dragged her towards the back. A chill ran down my spine as I realized we weren't dealing with an ordinary attacker. Whatever, or whoever, was loose in the store was definitely not human. The police searched all evening but found no sign of the intruder. After giving our statements, the customer thanked me for saving her life before hurrying off into the night. As for me, I couldn't stop thinking about those soulless eyes staring back at me. Whatever was lurking among the shelves was going to remain a mystery, at least for tonight. But somehow I doubted this was the last I would see of it. A few years ago, I had a bone-chilling experience while shopping at my local grocery store. It was a typical evening, and I needed to grab a few items before heading home. As I made my way through the aisles, I noticed an eerie atmosphere that seemed to hang in the air. As I turned into the canned goods section, I saw a man standing motionless at the end of the aisle. He wore tattered clothing and had a wild look in his eyes. His unkempt appearance made me feel uneasy, but I brushed it off, assuming he was just another customer. However, as I continued my shopping, I kept catching glimpses of the man out of the corner of my eye. It seemed like he was always several steps behind me, silently observing my every move. Each time I turned to confront him, he would quickly look away or disappear into another aisle. The whole situation sent shivers down my spine. Feeling increasingly unnerved, I decided to finish my shopping as quickly as possible. But no matter where I went in the store, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man was watching me. It was as if he had an uncanny ability to anticipate my movements. Finally, I reached the checkout counter, relieved that I would soon be leaving the store. I unloaded my items onto the conveyor belt, trying to focus on the cashier. But when I glanced behind me, my heart skipped a beat. There he was, standing just a few feet away, staring directly at me with an unsettling grin on his face. Panic surged through my veins as I realized he was holding a long, sharp knife in his hand. The other customers seemed oblivious to the danger that lurked behind me. Without thinking, I dropped everything and bolted towards the store exit. The sound of my footsteps echoed through the empty aisles as I ran for my life. It felt like an eternity before I finally reached the safety of my car, my heart pounding in my chest. I immediately called the police and reported the horrifying encounter. They arrived at the grocery store promptly but found no trace of the man. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. To this day, I can't forget the terror I felt that evening. It serves as a chilling reminder that danger can lurk in the most unexpected places, even in the seemingly mundane setting of a grocery store.